That goes Tom Barclay here outside the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium after a resounding win for Tottenham, 4-1. Another topsy-turvy victory, another victory coming from behind after conceding the first goal, but full of incident. Dominic Solanke scoring a couple of goals, having not had a shot on target for the last 6 games, really sort of backing up the faith that Ange Postecoglou has in him. Heung-min being somewhat stunned when being subbed off, and all round a really good win that gets them back into the mix from a table point of view, and a convincing win over a top 4 rival. So let's get into it. First half wasn't great, let's be honest. It felt like Villa, who are notwithstanding the second half here, a really, really good outfit, looked like more of a savvy side who was sort of making the most of a bit of inexperience in the Tottenham team. Although that wasn't really fair, because you look at the Spurs lineup. I mean, Pape Sarr was the youngest player, and he's 21 or 22 now, and had played in the World Cup against England a couple of years ago. So even so, with that in mind, it felt like Villa were slowing the game down where they could, reducing Tottenham to long-range shots, mainly from Bentancur, frustrating the team, and then obviously exploited a set-piece frailty, which hasn't been as much of an issue this season. I mean, they obviously conceded against Arsenal from a set-piece, but it's been nothing like as much of an issue as it was last year. But this was a bit of a return to that, where, as many teams do, they started crowding around Vicario. I think it was Pau Torres who was in front of Vicario. Brennan Johnson pushes him out of the way, only to be replaced by Morgan Rogers, who's there, Johnny on the spot, when Porro sort of flicks Dina's corner towards his own goal. Vicario has to save, and there's Rogers to turn in the rebounds. So at that point, you were worried for Spurs, and you did feel like if they conceded that second goal, which very much could have happened when Ollie Watkins went through just before half time and had a really poor shot wide, to be honest. You worried how they were going to turn it around, because nothing seemed to be working. But fair play to Postecoglou. Second half, they looked a completely different team. Whatever was said at half time really made a big impact, and within 4 minutes it was 1-1. Son Heung-min, coming back from injury, having missed the last couple of games through a hamstring problem, having missed quite a lot of action of late, really. What a ball that was into the box. Solanke was there, but it was Johnson who fired it home for what was his to end what, by his standards, a bit of a barren run. 4 games without a goal after 7 games in a row scoring for club and country. So that got them back into it. They could have quickly gone back ahead again, with Solanke finally had a shot on target, and it was a really good save from Emi Martinez, who, should we not forget, so lest we forget, is now the two years in a row being crowned the best goalkeeper in the world at the Ballon d'Or Awards. So that shows what class act he is on the pitch from a goalkeeper's saving point of view. But it wasn't long until they turned around from there. But in between then, we had this incident where Son was hooked on 56 minutes, and he looks pretty stunned. He was very surprised it was him. Postecoglou ended up sort of waving over to him, saying, "Yes, it is you." Son eventually comes off. They have a bit of a sort of civil exchange as they come off. Let's be honest, Son is like one of the ultimate professionals, very mild-mannered. It's very rare that he seems to throw a sort of strop. But then on the bench, the cameras caught him looking very frustrated, seemed to be saying, "Why me?" And that was interesting. I'll come to Ange's comments on that situation after the game. But you've got to say it was probably vindicated. I mean, just look at the result. Vindicated because of the way it turned out. Shortly afterwards, Solanke gets his first goal in 6 games, 7 games now, with a lovely move. So first of all, Ben Davies, who'd come on for Christian Romero shortly before, because Romero had flown into this challenge, was totally unnecessarily so, got booked for it. It was really a wild challenge, but actually injured himself doing that and ended up being forced off, which means both Spurs' first choice centre-backs are both injured. We had Ben Davies come on, he wins a 50-50, and then it goes to Sarr, who plays it into Kulusevski, lovely ball through. Solanke just about beats the offside trap, and a beautiful dink over Martinez to make it 2-1. And then it wasn't long after that when it 2-1 became 3-1. And this time it was another good interception from Sarr, from a poor pass from Torres. Sarr drives forward, releases Richarlison, he plays it across, and Solanke puts it in the net to win the game. The only bad downside of that was Richarlison seemed to do his hamstring in passing the ball, which is if he's out for any length of time, that's a real blow given how much he's worked hard to get back into this to full fitness, and what an option he looked off the bench, to be fair, when coming on for Son. So let's see how that works out. And then James Maddison sort of caps it off within 10 minutes of injury time with a beautiful free kick right at the end of the game. So all round, a really, really good win for Spurs. It was an interesting one. So they conceded, back to when they conceded the first goal, that was the 4th time in 5 home league games this season they've done that, conceded the first goal, and 12th time, or 12 matches they've done that in 2024, which unsurprisingly is the most of any Premier League team. Which just sort of emphasises how they often give themselves a mountain to climb. But fair play to them, they came back. But you have to think that if they can sort of cut that out, they're going to make life a lot easier for themselves. But on the same, when it comes to statistics, on the same side of it, that's now 22 league goals they've scored this season, which is more than any other club in the Premier League. So it shows you how they're scoring goals from all angles. Solanke talked about that afterwards, how confident they all feel about scoring goals, and that really does bode well going forward. I mean, before I get into Ange's comments, just a quick comment on Unai Emery, class act after the game. Turned 53 today, pretty miserable birthday from his point of view, but he accepted defeat. He sort of praised Spurs for what they can do, particularly in transitions, and didn't really have any arguments from this particular defeat, so he took that pretty well. So on to Ange's comments. So he was happy with all aspects of this win. He says that, first of all, that he talked about what a good side Villa are, but how he feels his side always has 2 to 3 gears they can go up. And obviously the idea is not to go behind early doors, but it does show you how they can sort of kick into gear and move on a few steps, as they've shown before against Brentford recently, against West Ham. And you have to sort of agree with him on that point. He gave a lot of credit to the players, given that the exertions they put in against Man City in the week, and to be able to come back and have a performance like this. But he also was asked about, obviously they lost to Palace last week. Everything seemed like a disaster for a lot of fans after that particular loss. And he said at the time that this was, particularly after City as well, that this is the same side then as it is now. It's not a sort of Jekyll and Hyde side. They're just a young team trying to sort of get to grips with his style of play, new players in like Solanke, and that they're going to have issues along the road. And he reiterated that message. He said, you don't fall off cliffs and climb mountains in the same week. They're just going to have bumps in the road as they go along. And once again, it's the kind of rhetoric that sort of makes a lot of sense. He just speaks a lot of sense on that front. And it seems to make sense. I guess the point is where can they get to where they don't have these Palace results sort of dropping in and out, even though there will be bumps in the road, but as frequently as they have done. Because I was looking at it at half time thinking, wow, if they lose this game, that'll be 5 of their 10 Premier League games this season that they've lost, and that suddenly looks like a really, really bad stat, particularly when you couple that with the back end of last season. But in the end they won, and won well, and it's all about what's possible from this team. Just on the Sonny sub, I was the one who asked about it in the press conference, and he said it was never going to be the case that he was going to play more than 55-60 minutes, because that was been the time when he's picked up the sort of fatigue in recent games. So that was always the plan. Talked about what a great ball that Son had put in and how they're going to need him for battles to come in the future. I asked him about the sort of reaction of Son, because it was quite striking. This is a player that has always been, like I said, very mild-mannered, ultimate professional. So it's the nearest you probably ever got to see from a bit of frustration from Son with the manager, I suppose, or a decision being made. And he said that he didn't see any difference in Son, and no player likes coming off, but no need to have a discussion. So that's the end of that. And I guess when you look at the win, that is the end of that. He praised Solanke, reiterated how the point he made before the game, how he's just very happy with his all-round game. So sure the goals will come. He knows it's important for the player himself because he prides himself on goals, but that's not how he judges his success. And that is what he was saying about Solanke after this game. He said Richarlison, as I said, was a hamstring, hopeful on that. Romero was feeling sore. He says a tough cookie, so the fact he came off is a bit concerning. So that's one to watch, both of those situations. I saw him give James Maddison a big cuddle after the game. I didn't get a chance to ask him about it, but obviously Maddison was left on the bench, having been an unused sub against City, which was quite interesting. I'd like to think it was probably due to the fact that Sarr's just merited a start and backed it up with his performance. But the fact that Maddison, after he scored that free kick, Ange was giving him a big cuddle on the pitch, despite saying publicly he's not a cuddle, was quite telling. Probably to give him a bit of confidence in a week where the England squad would be out again on Thursday. You'd expect, unless Tuchel's got much of an influence on it yet, that he won't be in the squads. If he wasn't before when he was playing so well, at this stage when he's not even starting for Tottenham in the last couple of games, you can't see it happening. But as Ange talked about when talking about Sarr after the game, all these players are involved. There isn't sort of first choices, which is something he reiterated ahead of the game with Dragazin. And it's just a moment where Maddison's going to have to try and fight to get back in. It's all about competition and levels of competition and players pushing each other. Two other final points he made, which I thought was quite interesting. One, he paid tribute to the important win on the birthday, what would have been, I think, the 52nd birthday of Ugo Ehiogu, obviously a Villa legend who was a Tottenham coach of the under-23s when he very tragically suffered a cardiac arrest at Spurs training ground back in 2017 and passed away. He revealed that Matty Wells, who was heavily influenced by Ehiogu, had told the players in this week and I think on the day about the impact that Ehiogu had on him and how much he'd meant to him, and they used it as motivation, but it just the Postecoglou made a point of it afterwards, sort of showing how much people at this club can make an impact and on other individuals, and how much it means to everyone really if you're anyone connected with Tottenham. So that was quite a poignant moment. And then just finally he was asked about the race to the top four, I guess. Ange's not really the kind of person to speak specifically about top four being his only ambition. I'm sure it isn't. As he said, he wants it all. But he was asked about the race for it in terms of the competition, because last year it was mainly down between Spurs and Aston Villa. But when you look at it at the moment, there's a lot of teams in form. Even like teams like Bournemouth are playing brilliantly, beating City, beating Arsenal, Brighton looking good, Newcastle. There's a lot of strength and depth there. Amarin's coming over to Man United. He did say that potentially there could be a bit more of a more congested field. A lot of that could be to do with the fact that I think it was the attritional factor he called it, in terms of the amount of games, teams struggling for momentum, and I guess you've got teams like Forest and Newcastle not in Europe who are making the most of it, I suppose, at the moment. But how, in a typically Ange quote, he said that he doesn't look at the table until the only table that matters at the end of the season. And in typical Ange analogy, he said that if he was a racehorse, he'd be having blinkers on, and that's something he said to the players throughout. So, yeah, fair point. The table doesn't matter at the moment, but I guess after some not so great defeats to like Palace this season, for example, I do think it does matter a little bit. It definitely does to fans, and the fact that they suddenly Arsenal a couple of points away, top four and a couple of points away, with the performances they've had in the Europa League and Carabao Cup, this can sort of really kickstart the season. Get a good win, go and win at Galatasaray, get a good win over Ipswich next weekend, then Spurs really feel like they're in business.